low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the August 4th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: in carrying out their first joint effort in a generation to boost the yen, the U.S. and Japan seek to contain tremors that could be triggered by a cratering Japanese currency. In stock trading Monday, major U.S. indexes surged, lifting the Dow 1.3% to a record and boosting the S&P 500 and NASDAQ by 1.5% and 2.1% respectively. Northrop Grumman signed 2 agreements totaling $3 billion to speed up production of missile interceptors. Nissan reiterated its annual earnings forecast as it reported its first quarterly net profit in 2 years. Anduril is in advanced talks with a Maryland port to build out a production site for the company's drone boats, a sign of the potential for defense startups. Tyson cut its profit outlook for the year because of soaring cattle prices, which continue to weigh on the company's bottom line. China's factories are showing new signs of weakness, risking a sharper slowdown in national economic growth in the absence of new government stimulus. EasyJet extended Castle Lake's bid deadline to Friday, aligning it with a rival bidder, Apollo, and putting the suitors on a footing to submit a firm offer or walk away. Sandoz said it agreed to pay $478.5 million to settle antitrust litigation over generic drug pricing in the U.S. Hughes Network Systems, owned by EchoStar, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization. Banca BPM dropped out of talks to merge with Banca Monte dei Paschi di Siena, potentially clearing the way for a rival offer from Intesa Sanpaolo. Now for the highlights under the worldwide section. Todd Blanche took steps to smooth his confirmation to U.S. Attorney General, formally rescinding a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund that critics feared Trump would use to funnel taxpayer money to allies. Iran said there weren't any talks underway with the U.S., and nor were there any meetings planned after Trump said he had called off a major strike on the country. 2 people died in Michigan in connection with the cyclosporiasis outbreak that has spread across the U.S. A security weakness in the technology crime labs used to analyze DNA evidence exposed 30 years of files to the risk of being hacked. Trump discussed ousting Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, after her office contradicted his contention that vandals damaged the reflecting pool. A Red Cross official met with detained former Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi after her family pressed government authorities to prove that she was alive. Anti-Jewish hate crimes increased by 8.5% in New York City this year, New York Police Department officials said. The House Ethics Committee concluded that Representative Chuck Edwards, Republican from North Carolina, made unwelcome sexual advances to female House staffers and recommended he be censured. Acting ICE Director David Venturella divested himself of his holdings in Geo Group, one of the nation's largest private prison operators. Russia blamed Ukraine for the Saturday bombing of a restaurant in Moscow, saying the attack killed 5 people and injured 19 others. The picture on today's front page takes place at a large waterway where birds are fleeing from what appears to be an explosive burst of water erupting in the air. And that caption reads, Romania's military set explosives recently along the Danube to divert water needed to cool reactors at a nuclear power plant. Another caption, low water levels have exposed World War II bombs and mammoth bones. Then there's also a picture of a canoe that is stuck in sand. And that caption reads, a boat is banked on a low point in the sand along the Danube in Rasova, Romania. The article, Drought is Draining Europe's Rivers, by Ed Ballard and Tom Fairless. A drought is wreaking havoc along Europe's rivers. In Romania, authorities set off an explosion beside a river in a bid to divert much-needed water to a power plant. In Bulgaria, 200 vacationers had to be evacuated from a stranded cruise ship. In Germany's industrial heartlands, companies are curbing production and struggling to ship goods. The incidents are all signs of how perilously low water levels in some of Europe's most significant waterways are challenging the region's already stressed economy. Europe is enduring a punishing dry summer with a lack of rain and sweltering temperatures stoking wildfires from Scotland to Greece. Now the lack of rain is reducing stretches of the Danube and Rhine to trickles, threatening an industry that has relied on the mighty waterways. The most vivid effects are playing out on the Danube, where water levels have receded enough to expose World War II-era bombs and mammoth bones. Low water levels are making it impossible for some nuclear power plants to run their cooling systems. In Romania, where one of the 2 reactors at the Cernavoda power plant has been shut down, the military in recent days set off the explosives as part of a plan to divert more water to the plant from another channel of the river. In Hungary, all but one of the 4 reactors at the country's only nuclear power plant have been switched off because there isn't enough water in the river to cool them. The PAX plant typically accounts for 40% of the country's electricity generation. Water levels on the Danube in Hungary reached their lowest level on record last week. Hungary's grid can pull power from elsewhere in Europe, but the crisis is nevertheless expected to push up wholesale prices and officials have called on businesses and consumers to cut energy use. With temperatures set to rise above 100 degrees Fahrenheit this week, the 5 most difficult days lie ahead. Hungary's Prime Minister Peter Magyar said on social media on Monday. The outage deepens an economic headache for Magyar, who is under pressure to reduce a fiscal deficit and boost growth. A prolonged energy crisis could force the government to step up financial support for the power sector and deter investment in manufacturing, said William Jackson, chief emerging market economist at Capital Economics. If there are concerns about energy reliability, that's likely to affect investment decisions, he said. Conditions on the Danube are a pain for tourism, too. The river was immortalized by composer Johann Strauss II as the Blue Danube, but views from cruise ship windows are heavy on the gray-brown hues of dried-up riverbeds. Last week, 186 passengers had to be brought ashore from a Viking cruise liner that hit a sandbank because of low water levels near the Bulgarian city of Vidin. Several cruise operators have canceled voyages. Other articles from the front page follow. Blanche rescinds payout fund. 2 holdout GOP senators remove block on his bid to be Attorney General. Washington. Todd Blanche smoothed his confirmation to U.S. Attorney General by formally rescinding a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund that critics feared President Trump would use to funnel taxpayer money to his allies. The move by Blanche, who has been serving as acting Attorney General, won the support of 2 holdout Republican senators who were blocking his confirmation to the permanent position. The senators, John Cornyn of Texas and Tom Tillis of North Carolina, had objected to the payout fund and to tax audit protections for Trump that were announced at the same time in May. In a 1-page order late Sunday, Blanche wrote that the fund is rescinded and shall have no force or effect. In a separate document released simultaneously, the Justice Department agreed to narrow the scope of the tax audit protections that the Trump administration gave to the president, his family, and his businesses. Blanche's moves, however, don't alter the agreement between Trump and his own administration that required the fund's creation. And they leave in place an unusual victory for the president, who turned a tax disclosure lawsuit against the government into the end of an audit. In a joint statement on Monday, Senators Cornyn and Tillis said they were pleased by Blanche's new written statements and planned to advance his nomination. That article was by Sadie Gurman, Richard Rubin, and Lindsay Wise. U.S. helps Japan and itself with move to aid yen. Currency slide had potential to increase interest rates, put investment at risk. By Jason Douglas. Tokyo. In carrying out their first joint effort in a generation to boost the yen, the U.S. and Japan are seeking to contain tremors that could be triggered by a cratering Japanese currency. The yen's slide to a 40-year low indirectly threatened to bump up U.S. interest rates and risked throwing a wrench into plans to pull billions of dollars of Japanese investment into the U.S. by propping up first Argentina's currency and now the yen. President Trump is showing he is prepared to help allies who are battling financial markets, a contrast to the hands-off approach long favored by U.S. policymakers, except in moments of exceptional peril. Before the U.S. and Japanese governments stepped into the foreign exchange market to buy the yen on Friday, the Japanese currency had been trading at its lowest level against the dollar in 4 decades. Early bouts of solo intervention had fizzled, sparking anxiety in Tokyo about faster inflation and a bigger import bill for energy as war with Iran strangles oil supplies. In afternoon trade in Asia on Monday, the yen had recovered to around 156 to the dollar following the U.S.-Japan move from a pre-intervention low of close to 164, the weakest the currency had been since 1986. U.S. intervention in currency markets on behalf of another country is rare. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. How AI Wound Up Driving Economy and Stock Market by Justin Lahart. The U.S. economy keeps putting more eggs in the artificial intelligence basket. Tech companies are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to meet AI computing needs and issuing billions of dollars of debt to help make those purchases. The rapid data center build-out is powering construction spending, hiring, and municipal revenues. Meanwhile, a stock market rally fueled by the rise in shares of chip makers and other companies benefiting from the AI boom has led to a massive increase in household wealth. That is helping to bolster consumer spending. Combined, those factors are likely responsible for roughly 1/3 of the nation's recent economic growth, according to Michael Pierce, an economist at Oxford Economics. But the strength that the economy is drawing from the AI boom is also a vulnerability. What would happen if the boom fizzled out? It is very much an AI-driven economy right now, said Barclays economist Jonathan Miller. It's hard to imagine that we would be anywhere near as resilient without that impetus. Mapping out exactly how much strength the economy is drawing from AI is less than straightforward and prone to error. Even so, it appears substantial. Details of last week's gross domestic product report, which measures economic growth based on what the country produces, showed that business investment in AI-related categories continues to swell. Spending on software, data center construction, and computer and communications equipment, were it to keep the same pace for 12 months, would come to about $1.5 trillion. 2 years earlier, the annual rate was about $1 trillion. Colleges raid endowments to pay their bills. Schools in financial trouble tap restricted funds from donors. Some states pass legislation to curb the practice. By Douglas Belkin. When Natalie Strauss's husband of 20 years died of cancer, she honored his memory by creating a scholarship in his name at the college where she taught accounting. Each year, she helps select a student to receive a few $1,000s at Notre Dame College, a small Catholic school outside Cleveland. But in 2024, the college closed. Strauss wanted to reestablish the scholarship at another institution. She asked Notre Dame for the $30,000 endowment, which, under the terms of the gift, could only be used to support the scholarship. Not possible, she said. An administrator informed her. The money was gone. She told me they used it to pay the bills. Strauss said, I consider it theft. Ohio's Attorney General last year filed a complaint against 14 trustees and officers of the college, alleging they improperly used more than $2 million of restricted endowment funds outside donors' intended purposes. The defendants have denied allegations that they breached their fiduciary duties and failed to exercise proper oversight of the school. Higher education is in financial trouble, and Strauss's lost scholarship is one piece of the growing collateral damage. College leaders are cutting programs, laying off faculty, and digging into endowments to pay operating expenses. Boards of trustees are under intense pressure, and some are turning on one another and the presidents they employ. In extreme cases, schools are covering day-to-day bills with funds that donors gifted for other purposes, without the donor's knowledge or consent. Leaving the front page, Northrop signs $3 billion deals for interceptors by Catherine Hamilton. Northrop Grumman signed 2 agreements totaling $3 billion to speed up production of missile interceptors. The defense contractor said Monday it signed 2 multi-year framework deals with the Pentagon and Lockheed Martin to build more munitions technology. Under one $2 billion framework agreement, Northrop will supply components, including solid rocket motors and ignition safety devices for U.S. air and missile defense. The second $1 billion agreement will enable Northrop to significantly increase monthly deliveries of terminal high-altitude area defense components over the next 7 years. The U.S. has signed several similar agreements with other contractors as weapons reserves dwindle amid the Iran war. No talks with U.S. to open the Strait of Hormuz, Iran says. Discussions with Oman continue on managing traffic in the waterway. By Summer Saeed and Benoit Falcon. Iran said Monday that there weren't any talks underway with the U.S., nor were any meetings planned, after President Trump said he had called off a major strike on the country to provide more time for negotiations on freeing up traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. Over the weekend, Trump said he had prepared to green-light what he described as the biggest military attack since World War II before U.S. allies intervened. We were all set to go, but when the allies asked to call it off, you've got to sort of say, well, let's see, he told reporters Sunday. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghdadi rejected Trump's suggestion that talks were underway, noting that Iran hadn't sent delegations or negotiators to take part in any discussions. He said all of Iran's negotiators were still in the country, with the exception of Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who was visiting a religious site in Iraq. In a social media post Monday, Trump described Iran's leadership as unbelievably duplicitous, saying they had asked for talks on ending the war and then announced that no discussions were being held. Nothing gets through to Iran unless we want it to, and nothing will get through unless a deal or total surrender is accomplished, the U.S. president said. Later, Trump told reporters in the Oval Office this is the last chance for them to sign a good document. Iran's foreign ministry did, however, acknowledge that Tehran was continuing talks with Oman on how to manage the Strait of Hormuz, which has been at the center of the stalemate between Washington and Tehran. The discussions between the two countries bordering the strait have grown more significant in recent days, with both Oman and Iran noting there had been some progress. Iranian state media earlier cited Araghchi, the foreign minister, as saying that discussions on creating a mechanism for ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz were nearing completion and in their final stages. Trump, too, had suggested the discussions are making some headway. He wrote in a social media post Saturday night that Iran and other Middle East countries had urged him to cancel his attack because the perimeters of a deal had been hammered out. Iran has been in discussions with Oman and other regional mediators about the creation of a new temporary route through the Strait of Hormuz that would allow commercial shipping to resume, mediators told the Wall Street Journal. According to the proposal, Persian Gulf-bound ships will enter via Iranian waters and exit via Omani waters without paying fees, they said. Have the Dodgers become the villains? By Jason Gay. The profligate defending back-to-back champs always seem 2 steps ahead of the rest of baseball, but their villainy remains within the rules. The Dodgers do resemble the impeccable villain, rich and famous, smart and suntanned, swanning around that flawless mid-century lair in bucolic Southern California, smug land of the $22 smoothie, the 3 p.m. goat yoga class, and the unwanted, inexplicable reboot. It isn't just that the Dodgers win, though they do plenty of winning. They're reigning back-to-back World Series champions, favored to win a 3rd title this October. Nor is it entirely their spending, though that's bonkers too. A princely payroll that's pushing beyond $400 million, or nearly 5 times what the plucky Guardians pay to field a team in Cleveland. Really, what drives fans nuts is LA's oligarch-style hoarding, its presumptuous seizing of what everyone needs, even when they don't need it. The Dodgers already have the best, richest roster in the game, and they keep reaching over with their straw and drinking everyone's milkshake. It's created a gloomy sense of dread, a resignation that the sport is broken when one team will do whatever it takes and the rest of the sport is pretty much competing for second place. That's what happened again over the weekend as the news arrived that the Dodgers had completed a trade for the Detroit Tiger ace Tariq Skubal, the winner of the last 2 American League Cy Young Awards, as the AL's best pitcher. As all-star acquisitions go, it was about as anticlimactic as it gets. Of course, baseball went. Of course they did. As the Journal's baseball scribe Jared Diamond pointed out, the Dodgers didn't have to get screwball. Even with a bruised rotation that includes a banged-up Shohei Ohtani, Los Angeles has the best pitching in the game. They have so many gifted arms that, if they all get healthy, they'll have to park a few during the playoffs. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, California Democrats run over Newsom. Who has more sway with California's Democratic Party rank and file? Two-term Golden State Governor Gavin Newsom or Socialist Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders? Apparently, the answer is Bernie, as the state party on Sunday endorsed the wealth tax on the November ballot. Mr. Newsom has come out against the supposedly one-time 5% tax on the net worth of California residents with more than $1 billion in wealth on grounds it would cause top earners to flee. He's joined by the California Teachers Association and Firefighters Union that fear a loss of revenue for schools and other programs. Democratic gubernatorial nominee Xavier Becerra also opposes the measure. On the other side is the SEIU Healthcare Workers West, which spearheaded the ballot measure and claims it would raise $100 billion. 90% of the revenue would go to health care, namely Medicaid. Mr. Sanders and the Teamsters are on board mainly to stick it to the billionaires. Energy and opinion among Democrats appears to be on their side. A Public Policy Institute of California poll in May found that 54% of likely voters supported the initiative, including 76% of Democrats. A large reason for this support is the proponents' misleading advertising, which Mr. Newsom has echoed in his criticisms of the GOP's Medicare 2025 reforms. Proponents, without evidence, say massive federal health care cuts are driving California towards a health care collapse, and the wealth tax is needed to keep hospitals and ERs open. California's federal Medicaid payments have increased 14%, $16.4 billion over the last year. Healthcare is among the only industries in the state adding jobs. Progressives hope the California wealth tax will shift the tax possibilities in the party. If it passes, you can be sure there will be a major push to make a wealth tax part of the party's 2028 national platform. Mr. Newsom has endorsed a national wealth tax as a way to blunt progressive criticism for opposing the ballot initiative and get ahead of the party's stampede to the left. But in joining the herd, he may get trampled anyway. From the opinion pages, the way out of Trump's Iran trap? We'll find out in 2029. He isn't the first president to get bogged down in Asia. The others left it to their successors. By Gerard Baker. How do you end a fiasco? It is never as easy as it sounds. But when it comes to do something you started through a combination of your own hubris, miscalculation, and ineptitude, the challenge is especially daunting. To the pain of the debacle itself, you must add the humiliation of self-admission, even if it is only implicit. That thing you insisted would be a great success not only has caused great harm, it's been an indictment of your own judgment and a vindication of everyone who told you not to do it. Few of us have the humility to make that kind of mea culpa, so the temptation is always to double down. If we just keep going, we'll be proved right in the end. Occasionally, it works. More often, it's how mistakes turn into fiascos. Most Americans thought from the start that the Iran war was a mistake. Now, 5 months later, they can see it is a fiasco. It has not only failed to achieve any of its principal objectives, it has weakened America's strategic position, enhanced Iran's regional and economic power, drastically depleted our weapons stocks, weakened our economy, and dealt a heavy blow to our prestige and global leadership. The initial temptation is to say that how it ends is less important than that it ends. That when you're in the middle of an unfolding calamity, getting out is your only priority. But just as you can blunder into a war, you can blunder out of one. Ask Joe Biden, for whom the overriding objective of getting out of Afghanistan led to a disastrous withdrawal 5 years ago this month and continuing damage since then. But we know too that to double down is to fall prey to the time-worn seduction of the sunk cost fallacy. We've invested so much in this effort that to abandon it now would be worse. In war, this fallacy is especially tragically persuasive. The sunk cost, in this case, are the lives of men and women. Who wants to tell their families they died for a mistake? So since he won't withdraw and can't advance, President Trump seems to have locked himself into a particularly fruitless paralysis of inertia. In his Devil's Dictionary, Ambrose Bierce defined peace as a period of cheating between two periods of fighting. This roughly describes what has happened during the peace since the original ceasefire with Tehran 4 months ago. Iran has been deceiving us by cheating, and we keep cheating ourselves through self-deception. This weekend, Mr. Trump announced, again, that he was calling off a planned escalation because Iran had agreed, again, to a deal that would open the Strait of Hormuz. Estimates vary, but it seems the president has backed off escalatory strikes half a dozen times now and claimed the war was over more than 30 times. That is only a fraction of the heap of self-deception we've been amassing these past 5 months. Among other things, we have been told the new leaders in Iran are reasonable and desperately want a deal, but that they are scum and can't be trusted. We've been told the U.S. would charge a toll for shipping in the strait, and then told we wouldn't. Allies have been told they weren't needed, and then attacked for failing to help out. Some see this endless back and forth as the enigmatic work of a pure genius, the cunning of Mr. Trump's calculated unpredictability, bamboozling his enemies, keeping them off balance, and forcing them into mistakes, all the while enabling the U.S. to regroup and rearm. Others see it as the derangements of a trapped and helpless man, one with a long-standing reputation for impatience and inconstancy, a leader incapable of making up his mind whether to move forward or back. I'm an Akan razor man myself. The dizzying twists and turns of the past 4 months remind me most of all of a line from the movie The Death of Stalin. Armando Iannucci's darkly brilliant farce about the chaos and infighting that erupted in Moscow in the days after the Soviet ruler's sudden demise in 1953. At one point, amid the bewildering turmoil, one of the Politburo members simply shakes his head and says, "I've had nightmares that made more sense than this." To be fair to Mr. Trump, he isn't the first to find himself trapped in a nightmare like this. He is only the latest U.S. president to be mired in a war in Asia from which he can't find a way out. Unlike in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, at least he has had the wisdom so far to resist a greater mobilization and commitment. In each of those cases, the war was ended only by a new president. It seems increasingly likely that this is how this one ends too. Something after January 20th, 2029. Despite the grand claims made for Mr. Trump's decision to go to war, the struggle we find ourselves in with Iran over its nuclear program, its stranglehold on the world's shipping, its ambitions for regional hegemony, won't be resolved by this president. How do you end a fiasco? You leave it to the next guy. Trump's unpredictability has cost too, by Walter Russell Mead. My grandfather was an irritating bridge player, avoiding dramatic and attention-grabbing high-risk bids. He worked on what he called the creep system, inching toward his goals by winning one boring low-bid hand after another. Lately, America's adversaries seem to be taking a leaf out of his book. Even as they step up their campaign against American power, the revisionist axis of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea seeks to avoid triggering moments like the Pearl Harbor attack, which roused the American people to the heroic efforts and sacrifices that won World War II. The strategy has brought them some successes. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are cooperating with one another more effectively than ever, even as war material and North Korean soldiers flow across Eurasia to support Russia's war on Ukraine. Information and technological breakthroughs flow back, preparing Chinese and North Korean military leaders for the new age of war. Similarly, Iranian drones helped Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine, and access to Russian technology and intelligence is helping Iran in its war against the U.S. At the same time, the level of gray zone or hybrid war continues to creep up without triggering a strong public reaction. Last week's reports that cyber attacks on water systems in 7 states may be linked to Iranian hackers created scarcely a stir. That shouldn't be surprising. Cyber attacks on both physical infrastructure and information systems have inexorably grown into a strategic threat. There are other forms of gray zone war. China is stepping up harassment in the waters around Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Beijing is also using trade as a weapon in its assault on European industry and has placed restrictions on key exports and raw materials. The weaponization of information operations has brought the most sophisticated propaganda campaigns in history into American media and politics. Migration has become a political tool as countries ranging from Russia and Turkey to Morocco hold back or encourage waves of migrants to achieve political ends. The infiltration of non-governmental organizations, political movements, and institutions by foreign operatives is at unprecedented levels. Cries to globalize the Intifada are essentially calls for global terrorism against Jews and the institutions and people who support them. Much global terrorism was quietly sponsored by the Soviet Union and its satellites during the Cold War, and one can safely assume that today's revisionist powers are easing the path for jihadist attacks on Jewish and other targets across much of the world. So far, the public response to all this is mostly a yawn. Americans may be uneasy about the state of the world, but most haven't connected the dots. Until they do, U.S. policy responses are unlikely to achieve the strategic coherence and focused intensity needed to reverse the global trend toward ever sharper, greater power confrontation, potentially leading to war. Normally, one would look to the president to educate Americans to the perils we face. But President Trump, like Presidents Biden and Obama before him, isn't rising to the challenge. Mr. Trump has his reasons. For one thing, he must deal with a fragile and combustible coalition divided between neo-isolationist restrainers and interventionalist hawks. Then there is his negotiating style. When it comes to deal making and politics, Mr. Trump believes he loses leverage when he tips his hand. Keeping adversaries, the public, and even close allies guessing is part of his method. For this president, tactical flexibility is the foundation of strategic success, and he'd rather keep China and Russia guessing about his intentions than lay out his view of the world with the clarity that inevitably would diminish the maneuverability he craves while making his behavior more predictable to his opponents. These are real considerations, but Mr. Trump finds himself in a jam. He must marshal support for the policy choices he will make in the next 2 years and for the cost of the defense measures the situation requires. His administration has to engage more persuasively and more systematically to ensure the public support the president will require to respond to a more dangerous world. Greatness in presidents has 3 components. Great presidents grasp the nature of the country's challenges. They communicate that vision effectively to the American people. And despite the inevitable mistakes and misfires, they ultimately find the right people and the right methods to deal with those challenges. Mr. Trump very much wants to be recognized as one of America's great presidents. Awakening the American people to the true state of world affairs would be a historic achievement and bolster his reputation while making the nation more secure. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. J.D. Vance fixes capitalism. Republicans used to have more faith in freedom than in bureaucrats. By William McGurn. Vice President J.D. Vance would seem to have little in common with J.D. Rockefeller, 1839 to 1937, once the wealthiest man in the world. But the two Republicans have in common a belief that capitalism doesn't work for the American people. Mr. Vance has little faith in market competition, which Rockefeller called a sin. Pat Buchanan campaigned on similar grounds in his 1992 run for president, in which he promised to make America first again. This Republican distrust of the free market comes from seeing competition in exclusively destructive and material terms. To give an example, Amazon is often blamed for driving competitors out of business, primarily brick and mortar stores, such as bookseller Borders. In this telling, Amazon won and Borders lost. And it's true. But market reality is more complex than a boxing match in which one guy wins and one guy loses. For the real winner is the customer, who gains greater choice, better prices, higher quality goods and services, or some combination thereof, because people must compete for his dollar. It is the customer, not the market, who determines which producers win. This isn't how Mr. Vance sees it. Where Mr. Buchanan in the 1990s rallied against the North American Free Trade Agreement, Mr. Vance attacks free market icons such as Milton Friedman. It's telling that in his new book, Communion, the chapter the Vice President devotes to economics is called A Dismal Science, a phrase Thomas Carlyle coined in the 19th century as he opposed the coalition of evangelical Christians and economists fighting slavery. Today, Mr. Vance says that while Friedman's ideas might have worked in a world where there are Christian guardrails on everything, they are ill-suited for our more secular age. The caricature of Milton Friedman as one who advocated for selfishness or a sort of chaotic freedom that undermined the common good is a classic straw man, says David Banson, a National Review trustee and managing partner of the Banson Group, a $10 billion wealth management firm. Friedman's love of free enterprise was rooted to his argument that it optimizes conditions for social cooperation, not that he was apathetic about such. If we're going to have an honest talk about justice, human dignity, and social harmony, do we really believe any third party, especially the government, will make better choices than we ourselves would make? While market critics are quick to point out the limitations of the market and its participants, they place extraordinary trust in the people they think will fix it. The beauty of capitalism is it is designed for imperfect people. Competition limits the harm they can do and provides real alternatives. The danger begins not when men compete to serve, says the Reverend Robert Sirico, President Emeritus and a co-founder of the Acton Institute, but when they conspire, privately or politically, to prevent others from competing with them. This is a central tenet of the free economy: openness to new competitors. Today it's unpopular in Republican as well as Democratic circles, albeit for different reasons. From the left, the Democratic Socialist of America wish to replace capitalism with socialism. On the Republican side, Donald Trump has embraced government intervention through tariffs and government ownership of corporate shares. Unlike some of his intellectual supporters, however, the president is willing to live with contradictions and seldom follows his own beliefs to their logical conclusions. That's why there are so many internal fights over what the true Trump philosophy is. He would likely say that he takes each problem and applies common sense. Mr. Vance is an educated man who served his country in a time of war. He has a compelling life story about his rise from poverty and dysfunction to the U.S. Senate and the White House, and he is right to be skeptical about a classical liberalism not rooted in truth, but in agnosticism about the very possibility of truth. Even Karl Marx recognized the revolutionary improvements capitalism brought to feudal society. Yet, even among business elites and other beneficiaries of capitalism, there is little appreciation for that fact. It is especially curious to find such critics of capitalism on the right, where many now put their faith in bureaucrats who, they assume, will be wise enough to impose and run a system with all the blessings of the free market without any of the defects of government-run economies. What ought to give Mr. Vance pause is that history confirms one truth about markets. The opposite of competition isn't cooperation. It's collusion. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a marriage counselor seated at her desk looking at a couple across from her. And she asks, "So much for the relationship stuff. How's your social media image?" You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 4th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful evening or day.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555.